Can you hear me?
Yeah, sound good.
No special effects in the background from my microphone, hopefully.
Mm.
That's great. So we're live, and I think it's going to be a really great stream. I've been looking forward to having a stream with you for a long time. I think for a few weeks now, but we just never got the opportunity.
Right.
And so I thought it would be great to talk about the foundations of drawing. I get a lot of questions myself about how I learned art, how I learned drawing, and you're, especially because you're such an experienced and exceptional artist and you're an art teacher, I thought it could be great to have you and talk about it because we talked before the stream. I think there's just one way to go. There's only one direction if you want to learn traditional arts. You can take many vehicles, but there's just one highway.
Right.
It's like the same fundamentals that you have to cover. And
Hmm.
I think I'm going to share a little bit about my experience. You could share a little bit more about yours, actually, because you have an academic background. And I read on your website, it's really interesting. You studied also in Europe,
Hmm.
and I think that shows a lot in your art. But I want to talk about that more in detail later. And
Hmm.
we also have a few books with us. We're going to share casually, spontaneously as we talk.
Hmm.
But
So
yeah,
go
just
ahead.
to sorry.
I said shoot. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just wanted to ask if you don't mind to share a little bit about your art education, your formal art education first.
It's a long story, but like I went to an arts high school in LA, like a magnet, believe it or not. It's a really crazy story, but just to shorten it up, I started like around 15. Actually, mostly to stay out of trouble because I was getting into a lot of trouble as a teenager, as a kid, and I was always drawing, and I was always interested in comic books and paintings. Also, my dad was like a kind of like a part-time collector for Art Deco and things like that. So he always had a lot of books. So I was constantly like taking in images and so the separation between art and normal life was like never. I just never had that. I know a lot of other people they sort of discover it, in the course of being an adult or something. They sort of discover art. But for me, I was always around antiques, especially. So I also think partly being raised Catholic and having a lot of like that sort of church, the imagery, the statues, the paintings, and things like that. I think also that made me very visually aware, like at a very young age. So what wound up happening was I went to this arts magnet, and I was only there for like a year because I kept getting into trouble. Um, and and in order to get back in, they said, well, you have to go and take like these courses at like a local community college. And part of that was an architecture course and life drawing and some other stuff. And basically, like once I got into life drawing, into the actual life drawing class, I was in a college level class, but I was like, the kid basically. I was only like 15. And I immediately, it took a while, but like I immediately became hooked basically. I was like addicted from that point. And my abilities, I guess, kind of rapidly developed. So I wound up taking like all the courses. I maxed out all the courses for that. Like they had like four, I think 4 or 5 levels, and then after that, it was just like workshops and stuff. You couldn't get any more credits. So I basically, after that point, I was like, well, I don't really need to go back to high school. So I took what was a proficiency exam. So basically, it's like I don't know what would be the equivalent in Europe where you like become emancipated from like having to go through all the courses. It's like you're proving that you're
Yeah,
a
it's the
college.
final exams. They have different names. I think we have
But is there
in
any
the
way to
US.
get out of like high school, basically?
Yeah,
Is there any?
it's
Yeah. So I did that.
sorry,
So I did
it's
that.
a little bit of a delay. Yeah,
Okay. How is it now? Good. Oh man, I can't hear you now. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I think
Now I can.
I don't know if you can hear me. I think it's
Now I
getting
can.
stabilized. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
back. It should be good.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. You was at the final exams
Okay.
when you finished high school.
Yeah, so I basically got out of high school at 16. I was just like done with it. And then I just kept taking like these college art courses like as like a means of, like I said, of still staying out of trouble. And eventually at some point I was just like, well, I just love doing this so much, so I'm just going to like go all in, you know. And I befriended an art history teacher who was American but of Italian background, and sort of got in depth into Renaissance and art history and all this. So it was just like everything after that, and then eventually I wound up going with him to Florence, and I stayed there for like 4 months, um, immersed in all that. So I think that had a big effect.
Oh, that's a big experience early on. I think going to Florence alone, just being there and seeing the Renaissance legacy, I think it does
Mhm.
impact you
Yeah.
long term. And I think especially if you're young,
I think figurative artists, like any classical artist, I think that they should probably make like a it's almost like a pilgrimage or something, like to go to
that's true
Florence. Yeah, so
for sure.
I think that had a big impact, and I went with a few Americans. Like we went over there, and that was just great. And so after that, like coming back, eventually, what I wound up doing was going to Art Center Pasadena. Actually, I went to Chicago first. I went to Chicago for like a year, and then that was like a shift because I was taking more the figurative painting and drawing more seriously, but I got basically put into like the the postmodern art school scenario, right? So I got immersed in that. Like I got like totally just dropped into the belly of the beast, right? So that was interesting. That was fun. That's a whole bunch of other stories, but that got me to definitely learn about so many other things, right? Like where did we go, right? Like from the 1600s or whatever till the present day.
Yeah, it's good to have the opposites, like we
Yeah,
can learn a lot from seeing exactly the opposite of what we want. It's
exactly. And I mean, there's allies. There were people in there that were of like mind. I had a Scottish art teacher who was academically trained, and he also was a real rough character. I mean, he was real. He was like a sailor. He cussed all the time. He smoked cigarettes. He was real rough, but technically very good guy. Very excellent draftsman. So I took more. The funny thing is I always continuously took figure drawing, not so much painting, but I took figure drawing continuously with
mm,
tons of different teachers, and you'd see patterns. You see patterns in their approach, like the pedagogy of, okay, we're going to start off doing gestures, or we're going to do this, or we're going to the what's a long pose to them, like what does a long pose mean to these teachers versus what is a short pose, because everybody says long and short, and they're not actually saying like specifically what the exercise is. And it's just like going to the gym. Each little thing that you do changes what is actually what is actually being worked, right? What muscle or what part of the
mm.
muscle is being worked. And in the same sense is that every change that people make to a drawing exercise impacts their ability slightly differently. Like there's nuance and shift just from changing the smallest things. They can have like big effects. So it was interesting taking many courses with figure drawing teachers, and I think that when I had the Scottish teacher, what was really different was that we got to draw like 8 hours a day, every day. Yeah,
That's a long time. I feel like after 5 hours of intensive drawing, my brain goes mush already.
and
It's
something happens when you push yourself to do that, and it was all from
yeah.
life. Right? It was all life drawing, and it was nude models, and it was like the first half. What I did was I tried to be analytical about it. So the first 4 hours, my only focus for 4 hours was just the contour. That's
Mm.
it. Just the proportion, the measurement, and all of that to really understand the silhouette. Like that was like super important to slow down, to really slow down. So I would spend about 3 to 4 hours in the beginning just doing that. Then we'd go take lunch, then come back, and then the rest of it would just be putting in the values.
Did you think
And that
about
was
that
fun.
naturally, or did somebody tell you about contour?
No,
Because that's something that's kind of neglected, I think.
I would pick things up because the thing is, like, there's books about academic technique. Also, this was also like, this is another thing that was in, when I was in Chicago, that was in 2000. And there was a comeback at that point, I guess, for some classical realism and stuff, but there really wasn't what we think of now as like an atelier revival. There really wasn't that in the US. Like, it didn't really exist. It didn't wasn't anywhere popular. I mean, there wasn't any social media, that's for sure. There wasn't any YouTube, there wasn't any of that. So um you pick things up here and there. There were magazines and things like that. But what I would do is I would go and I'd research. Like, I try to pick up information. Usually you'd find it like in a biography section, like in, if you read Rockwell, or if you would read about these great illustrators, you find out, oh, these great illustrators from the 20th century, early 20th century, they all were academically trained in Europe, like 99% of them, right? Like, you find that they were at the Académie Julian or some other French academy or something. And that was a rite of passage back then, right? American artists would go and have their sort of grand tour or whatever in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So when you would read about academic stuff, you say, well, what does that mean? Like, what is it? And then you find out, oh, actually it is, something like 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, that type of thing. And the measuring thing, or the slowing down, this is like a principle of gymnastics, dance, martial arts, and everything else, is that, how like radar works, where it sends out a signal and it bounces back, and then it tells it like what position it's in, right? Like,
That's a good analogy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when your body is in space, and that's the thing about drawing, a lot of stuff is sort of like neglected, like the physical, or I don't say physical, that's a little crude, but the I guess the dance, or the form aspect of the kata, right? Like in martial arts, you have the kata, like the
Yeah.
form that you're doing.
The Mr. Miyagi thing, like, you do have to practice dexterity. You have to know how to engage your muscles,
Well,
especially the arm
also
posture.
there's mirroring happening. There's mirroring, like mirror neurons, mirroring is happening, because in order for you to transmit the vitality, not just the shape, but the energy behind the pose, in order to transmit that, you have to actually at some level feel that in your own body. Like, you have to have a perception of the mirroring, like what, like the that sense of inspiration, I think, extends not just the idea of the pose, but in some sense the artist feeling a sympathy for the energy, or the action that's taking place. Even a static pose, it is a kind of action. It's just very slowed down. So training sensitivity to that requires slowing down at the beginning, because it's in the slowdown that you develop accuracy, right? Like for the shape, I'm saying, for the design aspect of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to just emphasize that that's such an excellent advice. It's really good advice. I realized with myself, but to me that came naturally. I think I learned a lot in a shorter time than I expected, because I never forced myself to learn anything really fast. I really enjoyed being in the moment, and I was very analytical with what I was doing in that particular moment. And to me, it was very pleasurable. I didn't feel like I had any train to catch. So I like that Romans say festina lente, which is
Yeah.
hurry up slowly. It's
Yes.
exactly that principle. And also like
Christina
the
Lynch.
kind of acting, you kind of reenact your subject somehow. You feel it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like you feel the
Yeah,
gesture, you feel the pose, you
exactly.
feel it in your body, and then you can transmit that to the surface, to the paper, and then, or to the board or whatever, and then that acts as a kind of signal or whatever to the observer, in a way that kind of like, when you see like a Richter scale,
Yeah.
like for measuring earthquakes, it's like it's a translation for a description of energy. But I think that the saying that, okay, slowing down, that's one aspect, right? Like, that's one facet of training. And I'm a big proponent in all of this stuff. Like I was saying about taking all these different, having many different drawing teachers, many different drawing teachers, and seeing where, like, you, of course, you look at their work, right? That's another thing. You look at their work compared to what system they're using, right? What they're teaching. a lot of times, these things are just sort of passed down thoughtlessly. They're not actually doing a kind of you're slowing down. Can you hear me?
You can hear me. There's a little bit, but I think it's back soon.
Yeah, it's periodic.
Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay. All right, so the saying is that
couple more
can you hear me?
seconds. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. How is it now? Yeah.
You're still off. I don't know if you hear me.
I can hear you.
I can text you. I can hear you from time to time. It's coming back, I think.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Guys, you can write in the comments if you can hear me. Different experience with the stream.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Now I'm over here to the left side.
Yeah, I don't know why. It doesn't matter. I was just reading the comments because I can see the chat. Somebody said, I can hear you perfectly. She is breaking up. So I'm not sure if it was me or you.
Okay.
It might have been me. So I hope this is going to be okay. But I'm really sorry about this.
Okay. Okay, so where were we at?
Actually, I started losing you, from Festina Lente, where we're talking about that, and then about feeling your subject. And I think from there, I kind of lost track because I was just looking at the comment section.
So I think, okay, like we're using the dance analogy or the sports analogy, is that I think of like a dancer or martial artist or any athlete or anything has a notion of the move that they're going to make, right? In a calculated, let's say I'm trying to think of a good example. Like if you're going to do a certain dance move, there's an impulse that arises that establishes or mirrors that form. It's an internal and it becomes externalized, right? It's like if you're gonna repeatedly do an action, it's an automatic thing, but you have a sense, okay, there's the move I need to make, and then you make the move, right? It's like it comes up. It's not exactly a conscious thought, but there is a sense of the type of energy that is going to be expressed. And this is what happens when you train in gesture, particularly. It can happen with other slower forms of drawing, but the gesture is one of the things that I feel like is super neglected, right? There's such an emphasis for being expressive. It's like, you know what? Just worry about the design aspect, but in tandem with everything else, you will inevitably express yourself. It's like this: worry about the body and the soul will enter, right? Worry about building the body and the soul will enter. So training in gesture in tandem, like at a different phase in the drawing. So the way that I consolidated all these things, and the way that my first teacher tended to go about was to a typical drawing session would begin with at least 30 minutes, 45 minutes of gesture drawings, carefully timed, and then shift gears after that. Take a pause and then shift gears and then get into some very rudimentary structural drawings that were more volume based or structural, but very loose sketches, right? Shorter time, but more time than the gesture. So these would be like maybe 5-minute poses at the most, maybe 5-10 minutes. So you're now training gently your faculties differently than what you were doing in gesture, because gesture, it operates like a different part of the brain. It's doing like a completely different thing. Then you finish with that long pose, analytical sort of academic style drawing. Like that's your finish. But because you're properly warmed up, if you've got a 5-6 hour drawing session, that's a completely different approach than sort of jumping into that long pose automatically. So because because if you, so gesture is one of the things I think that's like really poorly understood, right? So we're talking like 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes tops. It's usually 30 seconds to a minute.
Yeah, that's very little time. I think very few students
Exactly. People are
think about that.
concerned with the image. They're concerned with the image rather than the exercise. It's like the whole thing about gesture is it's the exercise is more important, right? The process is more important than something that you're going to hang up. It's
Yeah,
not
it's very
really
hard to let go of that because you have that obsessive, compulsive, thing
absolutely.
to be a perfectionist.
But because it's so short, because it's such a short period of time, it forces you to develop sensitivity to the energy of a pose and to see the entire figure all at once, right? To perceive the whole. It makes you think of the whole. So what winds up happening as you develop your like analytical skills, like this, the long pose drawing, because you're cross training, you're going back and forth over time, not in the same day. You're not going to go back and do gestures necessarily after you've done a long pose. That's exhausting. But over a period of weeks, what happens is your analytical skills, your actual shape building skills are going to be developed by the long pose, right? But your perception of the whole and perception of the energy is now increased because of the gesture drawing. So what winds up happening is your gestures become more accurate over time. And that's definitely pleasing, right? To you as the artist. It's like now you have actually something that looks like proportionately looks like a whole figure, except that it's all, squiggly lines or whatever. But it really forces you to take in the whole. So it does strengthen the design aspect, but it also, the main objective with gesture drawing is to train into the selective curves or selective straights, but it's mainly selective curves that describe the energy, the inherent unity and energy of the pose. Like that's primarily what it is. So long poses can, over time, if you don't train anything else, develop a kind of static or stiff figure. And this is a big complaint about classical drawing, about classical realism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a big negative in just doing long poses and not developing the other stuff, And I see this all the time. Like, no wonder, right? They
Yeah,
become very
you do.
stiff.
You do need the balance. I'm sorry. I just wanted to just to give you some not ideas because you could go on talking, and this is such a fascinating
Yeah, stop me
thing.
anytime you ramble, right? So just stop me.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to tell you. So it seems like I'm losing connection. So if I can't hear you, you can keep on talking. Apparently, everybody can hear you and see you very well. It's just my internet that is not working. So I'm just gonna. If I'm too silent for too long, it's because of that. But I just wanted to talk about go back to the very basics because we talked about this before the stream. I get a lot of questions. How did I learn drawing myself? And as I said, there's only one way, and there's one kind of curriculum that you have to go through. I mean, that is in principle, the universal basics of drawing. And I think you have to learn, first of all, drawing straight lines, curves, and then you have to be able to construct basic shapes like build up the sphere, the cube, and then put some light on them, some shadow, blocking the shadow areas, learn half tones,
Well, that's a
and then use
standard.
those things to build up, more complex compositions. And I want us to talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Also, it would be interesting because what I was really fascinated because my influence is from the eastern part of the
Uh-huh.
Western civilization, I would say.
Right.
And
Right.
that was very unknown to you for a long time, up until recently, which is very interesting. And to me, it's
Mhm.
only almost exclusively from the Russian academic part that I learned my
Yeah.
basics. And then at the end, I would like us to talk about design. And at that point, I would like to share a little your art. I'm going to
Mhm.
share the screen because you're not only an artist, you're a great designer. And I really appreciate that about your art.
Oh,
So I would
thanks.
like you to talk about that too in the end. But now just go back to the basics, So if somebody would ask both of us, what can I do to learn drawing? What can I do to be able to draw the human figure, for instance? Where do I
Draw.
start? What do I use?
Well, I would say that try to get as many references in terms of books, right? Get look at old master drawings. I mean, that's a big one, right? And I don't mean old masters like just 1600s. I mean all the way up until the 40s, basically. Um, Obviously, it's like a writer, right? It's like reading great books will set you up to be a great writer, right? Listening to great music will set you up to be a great musician. So you have to take in good influences, and some of that is a hygiene issue, right? There's a lot of bad drawing out there. There's a lot of bad art. There's a lot of bad stuff. So try to obviously get a real, a teacher, etc., or just develop your, at the beginning, I'm saying develop your taste, okay, as much as possible. Improve that over time. Take in and just look at a lot of drawing, right? Just look at art. Gather these references. And I know it's very tempting, especially with, younger and younger people. It's very tempting to have JPEGs of everything and say, well, I've got all these references. It's like, no, you don't. Unless it's printed out. Unless it's printed out and has a physical manifestation, even a crappy print is going to give you more than just the fact that you think you have it in a screen, because your memory is different from having. There's a the memory works differently when you're forced to do it. It's like when you're forced to write something by hand. It's encoding it differently in your memory. So I would say print out as many references as you can that are really excellent works that will actually teach you something, right? So it's okay, have it in a book, but if you're going to work in the studio, you don't necessarily want to get your books dirty, right? If you have charcoal or pencil or whatever all over the place. So try to get really great copies, and then you can put them like in a 3-ring binder, right? Like in plastic pages. And what I'll do is I'll pull them out from the page, use them, and put them back into the clear slip. But have great works always, like it's like the masters are looking over your shoulder always, right? Whatever you're doing, even in painting, this works too. You can put up like a printout and put it up to what you're actually doing, because maybe you like the color scheme of this painting, right? Or whatever. So have physical books, physical references, and just have that around you so that acts as a guidance system for your taste level, for style, for all of these different things. Like that's a must have, right? The other thing, obviously, like I was saying, is the cross training. The problem, the geometry thing is a little interesting because yes, the cube, the sphere, and all this is good for design, and it's good for getting your hand used to just simply like the basic movements, right? Like curves for the sphere, and developing values, a sensitivity to values, and this and that. But I think that the real sort of the thing that separates really like the kids from the adults in figure drawing, that's going to set you up, is the linear or the design aspect. And I think that line drawing, contour drawing specifically, is the thing, because even if you're going to later add values, you're still doing this within a confined shape, a shadow shape, a value shape. It's not necessary to be super ultra precise, right? And treat the internal divisions, value shapes, exactly the same as you're treating the outline. But there has to be some sensitivity to that, right? There has to be some sensitivity to the planes of the form, and a mass drawing in particular, foreshortening, things like that. But I think that the biggest weakness in the present day is proportion, is the contour, is the line drawing, the sensitivity to line drawing, the general masses, right? I think that's the thing that needs to be like pushed harder with beginning students. They need to develop that sense of proportion to a higher degree of accuracy, because the values tend to take care of themselves once you have a structure general structure for where those values get placed. You know what I mean? Because what people are doing is they're sort of plopping down and then getting feedback from like putting down value, and they're like, oh, where am I? Where am I? Well, knowing where you are, like I said, it's the radar system. So it's slowing down and becoming sensitive to all the wonderful curves and straights and everything that make up the figure, you know, and it's constantly changing, right? Any little pose, and it's constantly changing. So I think that sensitivity needs to be developed, but like in actual practical courses and division of time, like that's a whole other subject, right? Like to sit there and say, well, do 20 minutes of this or do 10 of these or whatever. Doing like this cube, the spheres and all those, I think that like beginners can do this like practically, right? They can take copy paper, right? Like plain copy paper. Forget sketchbook is kind of like overpriced copy paper anyways, right? But it has the advantage of being bound in a spiral or gum or whatever. But you can literally just take a ream of sketch paper. I mean, a ream of copy paper, like the large size, like 11 by 17. I don't know what that would be like. What is that?
I think it's an A4 format. I think there's also like a newspaper type of paper that you can buy. So it's really cheap and very thin.
You're talking about newsprint?
Newsprint. Yeah, sorry, newsprint.
Yeah, newsprint. Newsprint works well with waxy medium, like Prismacolor or some kind of like a pastel kind of. It works. Conte crayon. It works.
Yeah.
But with graphite, it tends to be a little rough, and it will scratch it, and it'll go through. Plain white copy paper, like 11 by 17, large format. You can just take that, and which, like as an ultra beginner, you can take it and draw the cone, the cube, and the sphere with simple lines, right? You don't have to sit there and render them, but literally filling up the pages like over and over and over again with those shapes and drawing them from all sides. So you can have like a physical cone in front of you or a sphere and a cube. And what you want to do is constantly rearrange them, like move them around and then quickly put those in with just lines, just line drawing.
That's a great exercise. I just wanted, sorry for interrupting you, because I was a teaching assistant at New Masters Academy, and I do tell people that if I want to refer them to some sort of platform they can learn online. I think New Masters Academy is right now the largest online platform for teaching traditional arts. And I attended a few courses there. One of them was Russian academic drawing. And students were supposed to do this exact exercise when they were learning, because they were starting the thing with the basic shapes. You also learn to control your hand. Yeah. And you also learn hatching. And then you move on to perspective, and you put like 1 point perspective, and you put a cube, on different points in that line.
That's like the standard like buildup. That's like the standard. And it's interesting because the geometric thing is more of an early modernist addition. It's something that actually is more connected with the Bauhaus than a lot of like earlier 19th century academic art, academic training. It's much more related to the designer aspect, right? To the Bauhausian kind of thing. It doesn't really have a long history. There is some connection between that and what Alberti and some of these other guys would suggest as far as learning geometry prior to taking up a lot of life drawing. But some of that was, I guess, ameliorated before by doing croquis or doing plate drawings. Okay, so prior to like cast drawing, you would do a copy of plates that were flattened line drawings. It's like it would be the substitute, or it would represent that same stage, where you would have like figures that were made up of just straight lines, right? Like an outlines, mm-hmm. And you would literally just copy them. So it's like a sight-sized drawing, essentially. You would just copy the straights, and that was sort of like that practice for shape building or whatever that you would use later. And then it got kind of like thrown out. That got thrown out, and then you would replace it with like the geometric solids. That was a
Yeah,
replacement
I
for.
also would like us to share some books, and
Mhm.
because my part is really short, I just wanted to answer in this video some of the questions as well, because
Yeah,
um,
I'm
I
not
can't
looking
say. Sorry?
at no, I'm not looking at the comments, but I should probably.
I had a lot of comments before because I saved some of the comments that I got, for instance, for
Okay.
the last 2 months. I don't know if you
Hmm.
can see you have, but you're on the phone. We have a chat and people are writing in the chat. That's how I found out that it was my internet, not yours, that was um, making all the trouble. But
Right.
as I said, like my main influence is the Russian academic drawing, and I
Mhm.
still have with me the books. These are 2 books. I made
Mm.
a video on YouTube. One is
Mm.
about the Russian Museum of Painting. I think that's in Moscow, and the Tretyakov Gallery. And I have
Mm.
these art albums. I basically grew up with them, and like when I open them, I feel as if I'm 5 years old still, because
Mhm.
I was so influenced by some of the paintings, the Russian paintings, because they reflected so much of my own environment, world, and even people.
Mhm.
And the light in some of the paintings, I perceived it almost identical to the light in my hometown on a summer day, for instance, specific times of the day. And Russian Impressionism was almost like, this is the ideal I want to reach. So I never really studied art systematically. My dad is really talented. Unfortunately, he doesn't really paint or draw
Mm.
anymore. I tried to force him, but he had this natural eye for proportions, for everything. Um, I think I'm echoing. Am I echoing in your
No,
computer?
you're fine.
I'm hearing myself. Um, and so we just talked, and I realized now, because later, I think I didn't really draw that much in high school. But I attended a high school where we studied a lot physics, chemistry, and biology, and they were
Mm.
preparing us for med school, basically, or any other uh, academic field within this biochemistry, natural science field. And I learned so much anatomy. I learned anatomy, pathology, and we had to learn like an enormous amount of information to basically absorb it over the course of 4 years. And later on, I realized that that stood with me. And just to be able to recognize muscle groups was a huge help,
Mhm.
because I kind of had the understanding, and then I just had to be able to replicate. Because I basically started to really, really study art maybe a year before the pandemic.
Mhm.
And then I tried to look up everything I could find online. And I basically copied Valentin Sarov's drawings and Ilya Arepin's drawings. I did a lot of that. And I found I found an instructor, Ilya Mirochnik. He's an American, I think American Ukrainian, and he
Mhm.
studied at the Repin Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg.
Mhm.
So through him, I found New Masters Academy, and I looked at his course. And it's very interesting because there's many ways to learn. There's the constructive approach, then there's the atelier approach that we talked about. Obviously, they overlap, but
Mhm.
that way of thinking constructively about the drawing, it really cohered with my mind. Somehow, my way of understanding things. For instance, I have George Bridgman's book. We talked about it, and I look through it, and it's really helpful. But I don't think like Bridgman. Um, I can copy his drawings, and I feel like I'm improving, but it doesn't really stay with me for too long. So sometimes you just have to choose what coheres most with your own.
You're
Yeah, just
saying
like
for the for the for
thinking.
the specific topic of anatomy, you're saying for that
Yeah,
specific issue.
yeah, exactly. Figure drawing, specifically figure drawing and anatomy. I would much rather go directly. So look at the muscles and look how they look. Um, Look at écorchés or just like live
Kind of like
models and just spend
in
time and looking at that.
he's like shorthanding forms and stuff like that. He
I'm sorry?
Bridgman. Bridgman's work. It's like there's a shorthand involved.
Mhm.
It's not
Exactly.
really it's not really like anatomy. He's it's more of the writing. I find the writing aspect of it. It's just like his sketchbooks. It's not really like an actual instruction for all of the things that will show up in because a lot of anatomy is not useful, right? A lot of it for the artist. a lot of it is not going to show up in the work, right?
That's true,
It's only
because we
like,
talked about medical versus plastic anatomy. There's like two different branches, and plastic anatomy is also very, very complex, and it's basically the same thing, but you're interested in what shows and what doesn't show.
and that comes back to the design thing. And I think that's the main takeaway that you want from studying anatomy for the art purpose. Obviously, anatomy and physiology are really super interesting subjects just in and of their own right. But when it comes to showing up things that will impact the art, you really are learning design underneath, right? You're learning structures and things underneath that will impact. And then you can actually consciously, right? So there's drawing what you know and drawing what you see. And a lot of designing work as you're going, like as you're actually creating the work, a finished and formal work, a lot of times you're taking liberties, right? You're emphasizing anatomy that isn't necessarily visible, right? You want to add something to it. And then there's other times when you're taking away. You're pulling things away that are anatomically accurate, but for the purposes of the actual drawing or painting from a whole design, there's a lot of times where you'll say, well, you know what, I'm going to smooth that out. I'm going to get rid of that landmark, or I'm going to, not do as much detail, because it does help. But that judgment is what I'm telling you, that's the kind of thing that becomes influence. That's a taste issue, and that gets influenced by looking at great masterful works, figurative work, where you realize that a lot of that is calculated. This whole idea that you draw everything you see, or record or report everything that you see, that's the sort of barbarism of like photography or whatever, right? It's like, that's not what you're it's visual poetry. So in visual poetry, you can be descriptive, you can be very accurate, but it's a very careful editing process that happens in visual poetry. And the great painters and great illustrators, great draftsmen and everything, they really are taking a lot of stuff out. They're not like putting everything that they just happen to see, and in a sort of unquestioning way throw everything in. So, and that's not necessarily saying, well, that inevitably leads to abstraction. No, I think it's an editing process. This is what Hildebrand was saying about we're visual artists as opposed to being visible artists, right? We're not dealing with everything that is visible. We're dealing with the visual. So we're kind of like concentrating the aspects of vision that pertain to the art itself, right? Or like poetry will do this, where it'll like people repeat themselves for effect, right? So poetry will do this like very consciously. You'll have like a repeating chorus or something for effect. It's like making it more formal, stylizing things.
Yeah, that's true. I wrote down a quote specifically for the stream because I really loved it, from Valentin Serov. He's probably my greatest influence, I think, at least at this moment.
Great.
Where simplicity prevails, angels hail. I really love that. It's exactly what, where simplicity prevails, angels hail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a grace that comes in when you're.
It's really great. And I was looking at, you can find a lot of videos of students at the Russian Academy, and you can see them drawing the big figure. They usually draw 1-to-1, the scale. And you could see sometimes a student trying to really draw all the muscles, and then the professor will come and you just like blur everything with the hand, kind of erase all the charcoal on the canvas. And no, you have to simplify everything. And immediately it looks a lot better and even more realistic, because you need focal points. In a sense, you are making an abstraction. And if you're putting too many focal points, as you said, like it's you don't. Your brain doesn't know where to look.
You're getting to the essential, like the not the ultra stark bare minimum, but the essential. That's why comic book figures or like simplified things can look really great and elegant, because they have so much removed, right? You're getting down to like, what is it that we need? And that's what I was saying about contour drawing, is when you know all the little things that make up a silhouette, you're not a slave to it, right? You're not a slave to it. And at the same time, you're not generalizing. And I think that's the other side of the coin, which is to make everything like a cartoon, to oversimplify, to mangify everything, right? That's a lazy way. When we're talking about like serious drawing and painting, like classical stuff, you don't want to necessarily oversimplify, but it's the delicate balance between, the ideal and the real, basically. It's like the
I was always
abstract and
tempted to share, but I would just try to see, because this is my second stream. I never tried sharing the screen, but I could share a few drawings and paintings by Valentin Serov. I don't know if you can see them because you're on the phone, but it would be interesting to showcase his art. And this is exactly what we're talking about, simplifying. This is a very striking painting, Emperor Nicholas II. Can you see this, Damian?
Yeah, it's kind of small. Let's see.
Let me just, maybe I can zoom in if that helps.
Yeah, Zarov's great. His portraits are fantastic.
Some of them are more detailed, some of them are so impressionistic, but he's so precise.
Yeah.
His precision is what makes his art really great, and his design quality. He knows how to use colors, lines.
Exactly.
This is very famous, The Rape of Europa. This is one of his sketches. It's so beautiful. It's so decorative. It has so much movement, and it's so animated.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the version that is the most popular one.
That sweet spot. I'm telling you, like the early 20th century illustrators and painters, they had the benefit of like being the recipients of this like 500-year-old tradition, and a lot of things were already being reformed. This is what I mentioned this before about like things were kind of being. There was a lot of like self-editing happening. It wasn't just impressionism that was going against the fuddy-duddy academic. There was a lot of other, I don't want to say movements, but there were a lot of other people who were already critical of some of the hyper realism that was already occurring in like the 1880s, 1890s. So once you get into like that sweet spot of like World War One, going into the 20s, you have this kind of editing process that's already occurring with representational painting. I mean, forget about like avant-garde stuff. I mean, if you look at, gosh, guys like Leindecker or something, or Coles Phillips or whatever, some of these amazing. Now they call them illustrators. I mean, these are just artists, but working in a more populist, as opposed to gallery work or whatever. But they're already editing everything. I mean, just take any illustration painting from like the 20s, and you can see obviously it's an academic level of skill or technical ability, but they're doing the same thing like Serov. They're taking out what is unessential basically, and leaving what is essential to tell the story. They're taking out insignificant details. But I'm saying that editing, to learn how to do that, you have to look at work that's already. You know what it is? It's that in drawing and painting, that is like the equivalent of eloquence. It's like visually eloquent, right? I mean, an excellent design, right? Excellent. You look at Serov and you think this is eloquent painting. It's like Rubens or Velasquez or something like that. It's the equivalent of that kind of thing. So, or Van Dyke or something, right? It's very elegant and eloquent. So that eloquence means that there's things that you're putting in. There's words that you're putting in that are flourishes, that are very important, precise wording of things. But you're also taking out unessential language. So it's not verbosity, right? It's not
a transcript of what you see in front of you. You have to reconstruct it and interpret it, because in a sense, painting, all of painting and drawing is an abstraction, because you take something that is three-dimensional and real and you transpose it onto a 2D surface. So you have to interpret that in a different way, and it works differently for your brain too.
exactly. And then the thing is that training is you're not acting like you're the first person to do this, right? You're not acting like, well, I'm going to write a poem, an epic poem, by never having actually read epic poetry. Like it's not going to happen that way. And there's so many people trying to do the translation without any influence, without any inspiration. But you're training your taste faculties. You're literally training your muscles by constant exposure, master copies, but also simply inventing along the same lines to say, well, how did these past masters like Serov and others, like how do they solve these problems, these visual problems of editing? Um, there's just, I mean, across the board, so many painters from that period, from 1900 to the 30s, basically, is like this golden period. But that stuff is typically not in the Western schools, anyways. It's typically completely ignored, that whole period. I mean, people act, whether it's the academic revival or whether it's your formal, brainwash postmodern art school or whatever. Either way, they completely neglect that period mostly. Like especially World War One. There's so many great work around 1915, to 20, before 5 years before. They ignore all that. They just treat it like, well, it's got to be commercial art or something, and they just completely ignore it. Or they act like it's just, well, the postmodernists, anyways, act like anything but prior to Picasso or whatever is just simply all one big blob of academic work. But no, there's a lot of interwar work that is even more abstracted than Serov, right? It's even more simplified. So sometimes it loses a kind of precision. You see this in a lot of 20s and 30s painting, where there's an attention to contour, there's an attention to volume, especially smoothing out forms and things like that. But their contour accuracy is a little bit less. So there seems to be a kind of laziness that sets in. You have to see it kind of degrade by the 40s. You start to see a degradation. It's kind of like comparing like 5th century Roman sculpture to 1st century, right? It's like there's a definite decline that happens even with including detail and things like that. There's still a sort of a
That's
decay.
amazing. We're always like having the impression that we're kind of moving forward, but then in fact we're not.
Yeah,
And
it's
we're always kind of going back, and then I don't know, just throwing everything around and thinking that we're going to reinvent the wheel. But like as with pretty much everything else, everything that you think of, somebody else thought about it before you in art. And there's so much. The legacy of traditional art, let's say like Western traditional art, is at the very least 2,000 years old. So it's like 2,000 years of, I think, accumulated knowledge and experience and experimentation. So there's very little left for you to actually come up with.
like
You just have to
2,400,
build on that.
like 2,400 years, maybe, if you include like Greeks, like Praxiteles
Yeah,
and stuff like that. Like
yeah. I should add the extra 500, 400, 500 years back to the archaic period and then the Greek classical.
yeah, it's probably about. And
Yeah,
then
that's
you
true.
have it's completely like wiped out or gone or there's periods in Europe, where you're talking like the 600s. Like what great figurative works do you see from in Western Europe, or Europe period for like during this from 600 AD to 700 AD? Like what's happening there? Like
Yeah, it's also like connected to a lot of whatever was going on, because it's we call the fall. It wasn't really the fall of the Roman
yeah.
Empire. It was a big crisis. There was a lot of wars. There were
I mean,
plagues, but things were going on because architecture was flourishing. Like Gothic architecture was tremendous. I think it was incredible invention and design.
but not during 6 to 700 though. Not during 6 to 700 AD. It's more like Romanesque or something.
Yeah, Romanesque, and then yeah, Gothic. I think it was maybe 7th century.
No,
Already.
Gothic is like 900,000. Like
A little bit later. Yeah, that's true. That's
there's
true.
like a little bit of a gap in there, but like
It's
the
true.
600s to 700s, you have manuscript works and a few frescoes, but they're super ultra stylized and really primitive, like extremely primitive. So the whole tradition, I that's a whole other discussion. I mean, there's a kind of like the spiritual as opposed to the physical aspects or whatever. But there's definitely a break in there when it comes to classical work, obviously, and so our recent continuity, let's say, if we don't include the 20th century rupture, it's 500 years, right? It's from Giotto or whatever, Renaissance, and then to us, it's like a continuous. So there's at least a 500-year-old solid tradition, but then there's a rupture, right? There's a kind of thing that happens in the 20th century. So we're kind of picking up pieces, but it's not exactly like 1400, the 1400s trying to pick up the pieces. Right?
There's so much more to learn about the past to be able to live fully in the present. That's a principle to live by. Speaking of which, I just wanted to recommend everyone from the Taschen, German publishing company. You have, I think there's 2 volumes. I have one, Leonardo da Vinci's drawings. It's a collection of his drawings on categories with a little bit of history, and it's just amazing. You have the anatomical studies, and I really recommend that everybody watching will get to buy these, because it's really amazing to have copy Michelangelo and Da Vinci, all the drawings. So just that's fantastic learning. Of course, some Renaissance artists, like their anatomy was more a design thing than a realistic depiction, but the calligraphic aspect of the drawing, the Renaissance drawing, is incredible. I mean, that's the standard, I think, in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So copy the masters. That's the only way forward, I think. You can't skip that.
Well, it's going to teach you. It's going to teach you eloquence. That's what we're saying. It's going to teach you eloquence if you do master copies. That's another thing that's neglected. A lot of people think they're doing master copies. They're copying, but they're not really getting at the lessons that are there. So
You can
sometimes
study and copy. There's 2 different ways to approach.
Yeah, and that's neglected because everybody is so freaking impatient these days. They just want to get accolades right away. They don't have the mental discipline to like take their time and do multiple copies or do a drawing copy. How about that? Take a painting, print it out in black and white, an actual painting, an oil painting, and then copy it in pencil, copy it in graphite. So you just treat it as a value exercise, right? You're not necessarily, although it is better. I mean, it is better to actually copy the exact same medium. That's when you're really trying to refine things, where you learn exactly what medium so-and-so used. The funny thing is when you see students kind of shorthanding it, where they'll go, oh, I'll just do an acrylic study. I'll do an acrylic painting copy, a master copy of an oil piece. And it's like, yes, you're going to learn certain things, but it's not the same thing as using the exact same medium to get the exact same effect. Now, that's more of a materials handling issue, right? But that's like a separate thing. But I think, just in general, like master copies are not utilized to the full.
It's true. Somebody wrote that Caravaggio is in the chat. I can see that now. Caravaggio had the privilege of seeing a collection of Da Vinci sketches in the gallery with some of the famous mirrored handwriting. Leonardo da Vinci was a freak of nature. Sorry?
His problem was that he would constantly start projects and never finish things. So he's a constant experimenter, right? Like constantly. So he's known more for like teaching us how to do things, but as opposed to like a sheer number of like finished works that are just,
Yeah, that's true. I think it's true for a lot of savants. They have like an immense capacity of storing things and then coming up with brilliant ideas, but it's very hard to finish anything because you're too scattered on too many. But he left behind a lot of great ideas and a great legacy. That's really amazing. And going to museums is one big thing. I saw Michelangelo's work recently here in Copenhagen. They brought some of his drawings from Florence, and I've seen original work before. I've seen Rembrandt, I've seen Klimt, I've seen the big French Impressionists, because I've been to Vienna quite a few times, I think ever since my early high school years. I have some family there, and I think that impacted me quite a lot. I remember from an aesthetic point of view, but seeing paintings, the
Well, being
real, the
you have
originals.
certain advantages, right? Being in Europe, you have certain advantages when it comes to figurative work, as opposed to American students or anybody else, Australian or whatever. But because we just have limited, we have lots of books and we have like selected pieces in a certain museum, but we don't have a plethora of work. I mean, we don't have this sheer mountains and mountains of work that is all throughout Europe. You have more access to these things in person, anyways.
Yeah, it's funny because now when I think about it, I've seen quite a lot of important works that are famous all over the world. But if you ask me now, it's almost like my brain freezes because I've seen so much. And I
Yeah,
think one of the
yeah.
greatest experiences of my life was going to Paris. And I got to see Paris while it was really great. It was, I think, 15 years ago. That's a long time.
Hmm.
And I got to stay with the French family. They were friends of our family. They were French.
Hmm.
And I was completely immersed into the French culture. And
Hmm.
I went to the Louvre, and that was such an overwhelming experience. It's almost like it's too big to store in my mind. When I think about it, I only
I
remember
had to do it.
episodes.
I had to do it in sections. I had to do it in segments.
Yeah,
I stayed there for about 7 months in 2000. I was there for like the spring, basically in the summer.
that's
And,
amazing. I only had
and
one day.
you were only there how long?
I only had one day to see the Louvre, so I went to see the Babylonian art. That was to me my
Through the book, right? That's just like a flip
yeah.
through. You're only there for one day. Yeah. Did you go to the Orsay?
No, I didn't get to. I was in Alsace, so it was the region close to Germany, and I
Yeah.
spent a week there, and then I went to Paris, and I got to visit a lot of different places, and it was always like in a rush because we also walked a lot. And I
Uh-huh.
was with a couple. I think they were in their mid to late 70s. I can't tell you how much they've walked. I could barely keep up with them, and I'm kind of fit. They're incredible, and we're just constantly running, taking the metro only when it was absolutely necessary. But from the Louvre, I
Hmm.
remember I seen the Babylonian art, and that was so impressive to me to see the enamel. Uh, it was so impressive. I thought it was like a dream.
Look at
Um,
the ancient stuff, right? When you look at the antiquities, that's another example right there where they just like carefully design these things. They look very modern, very, you know what I mean? Things are very smoothed out, very refined, whether it's sculptures, especially, right? That's what we have a lot of, that's what survived. But in lots of other ways, they really knew how to take out what's unnecessary. Not just the Greek, I'm saying, but also like the Persian work or the Babylonian or whatever. It's they still thought. I mean, look at the like those lioness reliefs. You know the dying lioness and stuff like that. Like those are really very refined, right? The,
yeah, maybe
the
I can find them.
yeah, the Louvre is just
Um,
over so much stuff in there.
yeah, it's incredible, and that's true
I really,
that I'm
I
thinking
really
about. I'm sorry.
the Orsay. I really liked. I think there was a lot of great work in there. But a lot of other smaller museums too, all over Europe. There's a lot of small single artist museums that are sort of like the small town hero or whatever, and you'll see so many great works like in these little tiny museums all over the place.
So yeah, you can see the dying lion.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a beautiful, elegant
Yes, it's very graphic, right?
passage.
They thought in terms of graphic, like you could have that as like a logo or printed out, flat, and that linear design is still working. You know,
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, you mentioned graphic art. I don't know if that's something that's used in English as a term, graphic art versus
well,
painting.
graphic we would mean
Painting
like
and graphic.
graphic we would mean like printed matter, like printed posters, postcards, anything to do with conveying, visual communication, like you're conveying an advertisement or a postage stamp, like anything that's like outside of just easel painting, basically, right? Like graphics would be traditionally, I mean, still illustrated, like throughout the early 20th century, they would be poster design, for example. So you're always, that forces you to shortcut. And that's how like Muka, for example, would do all this like printed work, right? That was all graphic work. But it teaches you, it pushes the eloquence even further, where it's like down to the bare essential. What is it that you're trying to communicate clearly, right? In a postage design, postage stamp or something, with a single color, right? And it's just linear and it's just value and it's just like graphic. Usually there's a strong silhouette issue, right? With graphic art. So if you think of like logos, right? Posters. And that's an extension of what I was saying about visual art as opposed to visible art. And what happens with a lot of overemphasis when it comes to naturalism and photorealism and all these things and the academic stuff now is there's a weakening of the graphic impact, the punchiness of an image. And that's related, of course, to comp design, right? But those things are kind of missing when you're only looking at painting and not thinking in terms of visual design just in a general sense of like two-dimensional.
Yeah, we just got a question: would comics count as graphic art? I wanted to tell you, graphic art I think it's both in Romanian and Russian. In Russian, you have like a different section of study, grafika, and we call that in Romanian too. It's poster art, but in practice, actually, you refer to drawing and I think also watercolors, because it's a different approach than classical oil painting at an easel. But graphic art can also be at an easel, but it refers to all of those techniques that are basically focused mostly on the drawing, the graphic aspect that you described so well. And it's very interesting because I have a more, it's a more nuanced understanding. I mean, it's the same thing, but a little bit more nuanced.
But like, for example, like if we think of Muka, right? If we say, okay, this is a very good example of like how a classical education should be. If I don't even have to go back to Michelangelo, that's Michelangelo the architect, right? It's like a whole other thing. But if you were to say to Muka, like, okay, Muka, do some posters. He does some posters. Okay, now do the Slav epic. The giant paintings. They're formal fine art paintings. That's the same thing. It's just that the design is the underlying thing that puts all those things together. The problem is if somebody has an artistic training where they can only do portraits or they can only do figures and they can only paint, easel paintings, and then you say, okay, design me a poster, design me a t-shirt, design me a business card. Like, certainly that graphic design is such a small skill set compared to all of the things that come into play with large multi-figured paintings, like multiple, so with Muka, he could just do both, right? Like all of those great artists from, like Klimt could do it. Klimt did little, graphic design plates, like in the allegories and emblems book. He does these things, and then the next minute it's giant portraits or giant paintings. So what does it say to us now that we want to separate these things, or we think, well, I'm really good at painting, but I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to a book design, right? Like a book cover. It's like, I think painters should learn how to hand letter, like do hand lettering.
That's true. I wanted to share some of Muka's murals because those are. It's almost like you can't explain what Muka did. You can't explain. You have to see it. It's just so overwhelming in terms of the amount of characters, the composition, the geometry.
It's a masterpiece. It's amazing. The series of paintings.
Yeah, I hope they're visible. Yeah, it's so to answer the question that we got in the chat, I think you do agree that comics are graphic art.
Yeah, they're art. I mean, it's sequential art, actually. The way I was trained is to view that as sequential art. You're telling a story through time. But in terms of like the material aspect of it, I mean, if you look at graphic novels, I mean, technically they're considered comics, but they're paintings essentially that are just narrative. So graphic usually is leaning, at least the way, conventional Western, it's usually leaning towards like punchier visuals that are super ultra simplified. So the poster or the cover would be, but not like comics as a whole, right? Because, like I said, these are blurry categories, right? These are just like, they all overlap. But it probably, yeah, if you were going to divide everything between like commercial or graphic and fine, like fine art versus graphic art, that's kind of an outdated way of looking things. But if you were going to split it that way, then you would put comics like in the commercial art or the graphic art, as opposed to the fine art, obviously. But I don't know that nowadays that those categories are that significant or that important to perpetuate, and especially the one of illustrator versus artist. I think that's a bogus category that is a bias of avant-garde, taking over the entire arts establishment, basically. It's a fancy way of denigrating realists and representational painters, basically. It's a negative now, I think. You have to be careful. You have to be careful about the term illustrator, because it automatically denotes like, well, you're not serious. Like, you're not a real serious figure painter. You're just an illustrator. Like, it's like, seriously? Like, there are paintings, all that stuff, like even Loomis and all that. Those are all drawings and paintings.
That's
And
true.
so
We have a
go ahead.
sorry, we have another comment. It was about Albrecht Dürer. I don't have his books, Albrecht Dürer, with the etchings. I mean, he's a master. The question was with still graphic art. Actually, it's very interesting because I have the associations of graphic art and fine art, which fine art includes graphic art actually in the academic setting. It's just a different approach.
Yeah, in the West, it's completely a separate category. Like, graphic is here, commercial, graphic and commercial are kind of used interchangeably. But it's over here, and then fine art is completely like not graphic. But it's
okay. So we need two answers. We need a Western answer and we need an Eastern answer.
Albert Dürer, that if
Yeah.
Albert Dürer is graphic. Well, that Albert Dürer, I think, is one of those guys that upsets that stupid categorization. That's a dumb categorization because of there's a pejorative involved. So if you say, well, that's just graphic art, then you're putting it down. But we love Albert Dürer, and it's like, Albert Dürer it's graphic by your definition. It's graphic, right? But it's considered fine art now. It's like a lot of time separates it. For example, Norman Rockwell. Oh no, he's not a real artist. He's just an illustrator. Then finally, what is it, MoMA or whatever, say, okay, he actually is a significant painter of the 20th century, American painter. So we'll now consider him like an artist. And it's like, how long is it going to take for us to do the same thing with Frank Frazetta, right? To say like, no, actually, he was a great painter of the 20th century, but so what that he did magazine covers and book covers and album covers and things like that. That's still the inheritance of the old masters. So I think when we finally rewrite, 20th century figurative art history, we're going to have to include all of these illustrators. Basically, we're going to have to include them.
Yeah, it's also the perspective of time that. Yeah, exactly. It's the distance from something that gives you more objectivity, and it's very interesting because my perceptions are slightly different, as we mentioned before, and it's also like sometimes I find the term illustration appropriate when it's about a textbook or a manual, and I think I had one.
That would be like a technical definition of the word, right?
Yeah, and I'll show you this because this is also something that I have. I think I was 3 when I got it. This is like a zoology atlas, but it really left a strong impression on me because I really liked what is it? Natural history illustration, and that's a genre in itself. And I think here this is illustration.
Your horse drawings. Yeah. Yeah, it's like drawing as a means of knowledge, drawing as representing our understanding of things. And that's totally different than just taking a photograph and just saying like, here's what these birds look like. When you have a drawing, because of that you were saying about it abstracts things. It's a natural abstracting. then it gets down to the essence, and that's like how cartoons work and things like that. They tell us the distinguishing features, the distinguishing aspects of, say, an animal or something. You diagram it in a sense. That's why I think I like that book right there. You're saying you had it when you were 3. I think that's kind of like shows up in your horse drawings and your paintings, and also like the armor. You're sort of like illustrating the armor as a means of understanding like the shapes and understanding the designs. I
Yeah,
think that.
for sure. I want that historical accuracy, and with the example of horses is a little bit different because I like the horse as an animal so much. I like the shape of the horse. It's
Mhm.
like, to me, this is perfect. This is the perfect shape, that I see on planet Earth, and I want to be as true as possible to the real horse. But that being said, I was thinking about making a video about drawing horses because I kind of have my own like horse archetypes. So I look at ancient breeds,
Mhm.
the oldest breeds, and they have certain features. And I can tell that these were sought after by all horse breeders throughout history because most modern breeds, for instance, they have Arabian blood. So purebred Arabian exists in most breeds today. Then you have the Iberian horse or the Baroque horse, the Andalusian,
Mhm.
the Lusitano. And then you have like the steppe horse, the tall version, the Akhal-Teki, from the
They're like
Turkmenistan steppe.
they're adapted to their
Sorry?
environment. Their bodies
Exactly.
like an adaptation in the design of their body to whatever their environment is. They,
Exactly. And that is the most harmonious way, I think. It's the most beautiful body shape or body type of the horse. And you see that it's very similar. If you look at certain Arabian lines, they're almost identical to the Egyptian frescoes.
mm,
Or if you look at ancient Greek bas reliefs, I can almost tell you exactly what kind of horse breed it was. And they, like the ancients, were also looking for that kind of silhouette that I also love. So
mhm,
I'm looking for that as well. It's very interesting, that connection.
mhm. Well,
So
that's a graphic thing too. Like the vase painting or the frescoes, they were conscious of it being like a punchy, that figure ground relationship, that design, the simplifying, right? The silhouette, all of that stuff. But that comes into play with like truly classical, right? Truly classical work. And you'll see like people use the term classical and they sort of think like it's, you know, moody tenebrism or something. And I don't think of tenebrism as being classical at all. I think, um, something like not necessarily full light, but you see a reduction in shadow in Caravagism, let's say. Like you see less of this in truly classical work, especially Mediterranean classical. You don't really see strong tenebrism, light, dark, chiaroscuro. You don't really see this as a means of describing form as much as you do in say more northern parts of Europe or whatever, like more and a much later time in the Counter Reformation and things like that. You see much more of that use, right? Caravaggio school or whatever. But you don't really like Mediterranean classical work is much more modern in the sense that it's more about like the linear design of things, the actual shape with without strong shadow, without strong value design. It's more
yeah, that's
like,
true.
yeah,
It's
they try
funny
to
because
reduce that. Yeah,
that's true. Um,
yeah.
there's so many things, but it's more like at a perceptual level. So there's nothing dogmatic about what I'm saying. But for instance, to me, Russian art, especially landscape art of the late 19th century, early 20th century, that period was a golden age. It's very solar. It's
Hmm.
really solar, and it's a lot of the painters were looking for beautiful light. And when we talk about high contrast chiaroscuro, it's not like in the Caravaggio, like dark, you're inside a room.
It's like adapted to its environment because
It's
obviously,
adapted.
if you have a place that's like really sensitive in terms of that winter, summer, contrast, if you're in that kind of landscape, this is one of the things that characterizes like classical versus anti-classical, or like you could look at it Gothic, for example, Gothic as representing anti-classical, like an earlier form. I don't mean like anti in a modern sense, but the opposite. I don't know. Oh man, you froze up again.
Can you
You
hear
were
me?
freezing. Yeah, now you're fine.
Okay.
You can hear me. Okay, so there's like a
Yeah.
classical versus anti-classical, and in a sense, like that tenebrism or chiaroscuro focus is very much in line with like romantic, let's say romantic a sense of painting, right? And it's like you're saying about the Russian. I mean, this is probably mirrored in some way as through Russian literature, maybe, and Russian music. Would you say?
I don't know if you can hear me, but I can hear you quite well still.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm
So
really sorry. This is very unusual that my internet is so bad.
okay.
I should be fine now.
I can hear you. But did you catch that part?
Am I okay?
Yeah, you're good.
I lost you. I lost the last maybe about 20 seconds.
Oh no, what I was saying is that you were saying about the landscape, right? Like the issue of the chiaroscuro or tenebrism in the Russian landscape painting. And I was saying is that's kind of what I was saying about figure painting or whatever in the West or landscape painting is that sensitivity to the changes in the seasons. This is mirrored in the painting in the emphasis between light and dark that you don't really see as much traditionally in the Mediterranean because the focus the landscape doesn't really change very much, right? Through the cold and through the warm seasons, there's less notice of that. There's much more of a notice of age and of the figure, right? People are constantly looking at each other. People are wearing less clothing, in antiquity or whatever, and now like there's more of an awareness of the change between young and old, right? Between like and the ancients would be looking at sort of like the muscles or the athletes in his prime or the warrior in his prime versus the old man or the infant or whatever. That there's more of an attention to the figure traditionally, like and you see this within like in the Renaissance, you still see this where like landscapes are kind of diminished in the background, like in the Italian Renaissance. They're sort of like these little afterthoughts, right? Whereas the Northern Renaissance, you see like figures are kind of small, and then you see the landscape sort of taking up most of the images. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can. I was thinking about probably my connection went down because I was trying to share the screen. I was thinking about Polenov. Polenov is also one of my favorite artists, and you mentioned some things that I never thought about, but they're really deep because when you're in the southern sun, everything is open, everything is like nothing is hidden,
The leaves don't change color in the Mediterranean. Like it's like the cypresses are there, the olive trees. You don't see color change really throughout. You know what I mean? You just the difference between the seasons. So as I'm saying, like that you see this expressed in the work and in the classical. It's all about the unchanging in a lot of ways. Buildings, truly classical buildings, tend to be wider than they are taller. Right? They create the idea of like stability, right? Like it's longer format. The anti-classical is more vertical, like trees, like Gothic spires, right? It's a different energy. It's a different vibe. It's totally, but so that's just another thing like to keep in mind, like,
yeah, no, that's a fascinating talk about how the environment influences the way you perceive things, and also because aesthetics, beauty is a really complex category, but it's really interesting because even though yeah, you mentioned some things that give me a lot of things to think about.
so like when you were saying about the or we were saying about the Russian landscape painting, my only reference point is like some Scandinavian painting that I've seen where it strikes me as very unusual. I mean, oh, what happened?
No, I'm here.
Yeah, it strikes me as unusual because I guess I'm coming from that bias that's more of a Mediterranean bias. Even though I'm, born in the States, I'm in California. California has like a Mediterranean climate essentially, right? So it's not that big of a difference. Also, like heritage-wise, but it's like when I see the Scandinavian painting,
Oh, look at this.
Yeah,
So
it
it's very
makes
similar to Danish painting. Danish painting is very solar too.
Mhm.
Now it's loading, but Danish academic painting is a big branch out of the European
All that
traditional.
northern work is going to have that, right? Because of the fact that light is such a big deal in places like, as you go further and further up. It's such a difference to the Mediterranean.
Yeah, so you can see that. So from my point of view, I think there's some connection, and I think it's because of the area of confluence between cultures in the East. I think it's also the closure because of the Orthodoxy, because of the Orthodox Church. We're
Hmm.
kind of have like a similar culture, but I
Hmm.
feel like this Eastern worldview is too big because it's not a different worldview, but just view of aesthetics is a little bit more solar than the Western and the Nordic one, even though the Russian academic art includes Russia is very Nordic, expanded towards the north, and it can be dark, but it has a lot of the Byzantine legacy, and the Byzantine legacy to me, in my own perception, is very solar. It's a sort of optimism that also embraces tragedy, but
Hmm.
it's a very different way. For instance, and I'm going to say something that is really, really bad. The saga, The Lord of the Rings, the mythology to me is too dark. The Germanic mythology, the Anglo-Saxon mythology, and also the movies that were made based on the book Lord of the Rings, for instance, as that's a good example for me. The aesthetics, I don't want to be there. For a lot of people, which I find it really fascinating because a lot of foreign tourists come to Romania, they see the Carpathians and they visit some villages, and wow, the first reaction is like, this is so beautiful. It's exactly like in The Hobbit. And to me, it's the last thing I would think about. It's the very last thing, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, because I have such a different paradigm of aesthetics somehow. Not very different,
Well,
but this
those
nuance,
things that
yeah.
have, like, if they've shaped people, over thousands of years, it's hard to say, well, okay, this is in the DNA, or this is in some sort of, you don't know where it is, but there obviously is going to be that kind of spiritual um, flavoring, I guess, between different generic regions. I mean, the Mediterranean has like its own kind of vibe, right? And I imagine I spent a little bit of time in Moravia and in the Czech Republic. Like I did, I spent like about probably like 3 or 4 months in Prague, and then I went down and I got this like feeling of, and I'm only at the edge of Eastern Europe, right? But like definitely a different vibe from Western Europe. Like it's a different feeling, but I never got that same sense of what I imagine Scandinavian or Germanic. They do feel different. Like the Slavic and the Germanic seem so different, and there's much more of like maybe color. Like I think is what you're saying, like the Carpathians or whatever. Like there's more color or more maybe you're saying like the Scandinavian stuff or the like the Lord of the Rings is much more harsh, maybe more dark. You're saying like the world is like the sagas and stuff like that. Like it's kind of
I
like a
basically feel like I'm
Viking.
in a cave somehow, and it's wet and it's cold, and I don't like
It's
that.
definitely, yeah. And I think that's something joyful for people that are within that, right? Like people that are coming from that background, and that's an aesthetic. It's funny too because like Lord of the Rings, they have like a reference, the generic reference to like I forget the names. I'm not really like into Lord of the Rings, but I remember what is it, like the guys that they said that they have like the darker hair that are kind of representing like the meds, like the um what is it, Minas Terrace, I think it's called, like
I
the
don't know.
middle.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's I might be getting this totally wrong, but it's like they're supposed, and then they say like, oh yeah, they had their glory days back in the old days, but they're good guys or whatever. But I remember in the movie, like they all had dark hair, and so there was like an allusion to like, okay, these are the meds, but they don't call them that. They just have like a different name or whatever. And then the Rohim or whatever are like blonde or whatever, like these guys that are further north. So they're supposed to be representing like, all these, but I don't know that there's no like awareness or whatever for like Slavic people in the Lord of the Rings, right? They're not like, that's not like another group. I don't know. Maybe there is. Maybe there's some obscure like second chapter or something where they're like talking about that. But
okay, we got Minas Tirith or Minas Tirith or
yeah,
Tirith. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm really sorry for. I'm very unfamiliar with the lore. We got this really funny comment, like how the solar climate, talking about how the environment influences our perception of the world. The solar climate of California might have played a big role in massive bodybuilding culture. I think it definitely does.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. It's a Mediterranean climate, and then it also historically was really settled by Spanish colonists, but it wasn't. It was very rudiment. I mean, it was very backwards because this is like the furthest reaches of New Spain, and then you have eventually like the United States, sort of, it's the Manifest Destiny, like West Coast. So then you have like the Anglo and the American influence, and the Spanish acts as like a substrate to all that. So like they don't change the names of the city. So everything here, every city, the streets, everything is a Spanish name. And there was even a Spanish revival in architecture in the 20s. And you see this in all kinds of things. But so those go hand in hand. Sometimes they call it Mediterranean revival because they would do like Italianate / Spanish kind of architecture and things like this. And then it got into the movies and everything at the time. But in a way, like, yeah, the bodybuilding culture and all that other stuff kind of reaffirms all that. Like over time, you see the bikinis and, all these kinds of things. It's very much solar, but we have the most amazing like winters and fall because it's like a nice, even lighting like all the time. Like it's just kind of, you don't really notice that big of a difference in the seasons. I mean, we have a rainy Februarys, and that's about. And the rest of the time it's just warm, But also it's gentler the closer you are to the beach. So if you're right, like at Santa Monica, then it's really not changing all year. It's nice.
I wanted to share it because I also want to move to your art, and I would like you to comment. I think even though your screen, I mean, you see it very small, you could recognize your own art. So we could talk a little bit about the approach. But I wanted to share because I'm not very familiar. I know that Denmark had a significant, a solid tradition of academic art, specifically sculpture, and then they had this impressionist art current. They're known as the Skagen. The school, it's spelled Skagen, Skagen painters. And I wanted to share a little bit of their art because it's really solar. And what you said, Danes really love the sun. When it's summer, the days are really long. Obviously, in Norway happens the same, and in Finland and Sweden.
It's like a precious resource. If you miss the sun, you're screwed, right? Like there's so little of it the rest of in the winter or whatever.
Let me try soon to see if it works. I hope my connection is not going to die.
It's like in places like California, it's like we get tired of it. We gotta are like welcoming, wishing the winter to come to make things more mild. We can actually dress up or whatever.
So all these paintings are late 19th century, and as you can see, they're very bright. They're just warm. It's this idyllic, serene life. Beautiful ladies in nice, simple white dresses on the beach. All these beautiful scenes inside. There's always the sun shining through in the portraiture, in the landscapes, and it's so optimistic. It's such a you feel very recharged when you look at the paintings.
And that helps them probably get through the darker seasons, right?
Yeah, they really soak it in. It's like lizards, you just want to capture all the solar energy.
I think that work probably helped them cope, right? Get through the darker times, right? Like that, to have those things, almost to preserve the best, what's available.
It's true. I mean, imagine having a beautiful painting inside the house with a beautiful sea during summer and some nice ladies walking by. It does make a significant difference in the perceived atmosphere of the house. But yeah, it's definitely, I know that Danes, they usually even take time off from work to be outside in the sun when it's really nice and warm.
Yeah, because here it just gets hot. Like it's like all here. It's like you get tired of it. You get tired of the sun and you get tired of it over here because it's like it's like abundance of it and they like get sick of it.
Yeah, whatever you have, it becomes a banality very soon. So unfortunately, we're humans and we don't do well with
Yeah.
I don't know,
There's like
banality.
people in Seattle, right? Like people love the rain. They're like, oh, I love the rain. I love the sound of the rain. And then they go to Seattle and it's like my cousins live up there and it's just like rain all the time, constant. Everything is gray or whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's how it is right now here. It's not a white. We have a little bit of snow because I'm in Copenhagen in midwinter, mostly January, but it's mostly just cold and wet. Some winters are nicer, but it's just the continuous darkness, and you have a little bit of light in the morning, but then it's completely cloudy, and the clouds are really low. So you feel like you have to walk somehow hunched. You feel philosophically oppressed because of
Well,
the
that
weather.
like you're like adapted to a much, you know, brighter place, right? You're naturally inclined towards that, but you're in this other place. So it's like you're forced you're forced
Yeah,
to
it's true. I really hated the cold. It used to be very, very cold back home. And now I miss it because it was a dry cold. I don't know what's minus 30 degrees Celsius, but I experienced that and it was extreme. I just wanna look it up so I could tell you my trauma. Minus 22. Yeah. Yeah, I
minus
have
22
minus 22
Celsius or
Fahrenheit.
minus 2 Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit.
Oh yeah,
Fahrenheit.
that's anything close to zero is cold, very cold. So
Yeah, so I experienced that, but it was so bad.
and that was 22 minus 22 in Copenhagen.
No, back home in Romania. In
Oh,
Copenhagen is quite mild. It is sometimes it's below freezing point in winter for maybe 2-3 weeks, but not more than 2 weeks
so
continuously.
like in where we're at, like in man, it gets that cold in Romania.
Because I'm up north. I'm from up north, very close to Ukraine, and right at the foot of the Oriental Carpathians. We have Siberian air masses coming in winter, and it's like the Eurasian steppe a little bit lower, and it's just no obstacles. And when the winters are really, really harsh, very windy, and also up in the mountains, you have the microclimate in the mountains. Some
So
areas.
what's it like near like Moldova or something? Like near the water? Is it
Yeah,
still?
I'm in the Romanian Moldova. It's the Romanian part of Moldova. That's where
Yeah.
I was born and grew up.
So what's the weather like there? I mean, is it's I imagine it's more mild. It's like near the
That's
water.
where it was so cold. But I was up north, close to the Carpathians, because it's the Carpathian Arch, and then
Right.
Moldova, it's starting to become a little bit more plain. But the winters there, because of the Siberian air masses, there's a Siberian anticyclone, and in winter it can hit so hard. It covers everything in thick snow. Now the winters are milder, but used to be pretty harsh. But then summers are really hot too. So you got the extremes. Let me try to share the screen because I think we can do for maybe 25 more minutes.
Go
And we
ahead,
can
like
talk about.
or questions or whatever.
So I wanted to get to the part of we covered the foundations of drawing. Obviously, we hinted out what can be done, what should be done, what you should focus on your training. We talk about different influences in terms of aesthetics. It was a really amazing talk. And now I want to talk about design because that's the ultimate, that's the final boss. If you want to become a great artist, you have to be a great designer. And yeah, one thing that I really appreciate about your art is that you design. You're a great designer, and I wanted to share some of your pieces. Now, I don't know. I'm going to try not to put nudes on because I don't know whether it's going to be flagged. I
Right.
had some bad experiences in the past.
Yeah, you never know or with whatever.
So I just started with this one. It's, when we talk about graphic art and painting, to me, from my Eastern perspective, a lot of your work is graphic.
Mm-hmm.
because it has the drawing, the construction, the outline as a main focus.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use the background just for its purely decorative aspect
Mm-hmm.
or quality.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you use a lot of mixed media. So I think I would ask you how you approach pieces like
That
this
one's
one.
all oil. So that one right there, that's
Yeah,
just oil. That's
that's
just
just
oil.
oil.
Yeah. There's maybe a tiny bit of gold enamel that is outlining like the floral shapes. I think I put like very small little bit of gold line drawing. So in a sense, yeah, like you're saying about the Byzantine or the Orthodox is a massive influence. The Romanesque or whatever Orthodox is like a massive influence for Klimt. Like the gold style or whatever. So then you can find different that graphic, incorporating gold or incorporating these floral motifs. Um, I think that was probably in the back of my mind, like doing this one, where you have a pretty standard, drapery and this kind of approach, and then you have a flat, like the combination of the flat and the relief, right? That's a good counterpoise to have,
Hmm.
because I could have done it as a flat wall. I could have just done it like a solid color and called it a day and just been like, okay, there's a painting and there's just this solid color. And there's times to do that. There's times to have an empty um, figure ground relationship where it's just completely blank. But in this case, uh, I wanted to, it's almost like it's moving around, and you don't know if it's wallpaper or if it's um, painted, painted wall or something. You don't really. It's not important. It's just how all that works together. And
What I
you have.
really love,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
it's the flat background. So the background versus the foreground. The foreground is 3D. It
Mm-hmm.
has it has this 3D aspect to it, and the fact that the background is so flat, it gives it more of an animated
Mm-hmm.
appearance,
Yeah,
and I really love that.
I like doing that. It's a great, like I said, counterpoise, like where you have those things together, and that one,
That's
like,
definitely Klimt influence here. I think Art Deco, Gustav Klimt, they are significant influences in your art.
yeah, for sure. Um, this one was for there was a gallery show in San Francisco, and they had the Moleskine show. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where like you're painting inside of the sketchbook, and
No, no.
the gallery hands out the sketchbooks. You submit it like that, and then they go into like a little frame. So it's like the whole entire show are all of these like finished works, but you're using up the whole sketchbook. You're not like tearing it out or anything. You're actually mounting the sketchbook. So that one I documented to show like the design. I have a ton of color studies for that one. I have linear. I have like two different cartoons that I did, two different line drawing layouts for that one, and then it was done in oils, sealed the pages, right, of the sketchbook. Of the Moleskine paper is pretty forgiving, but I did an underpainting in I believe it was gouache or acrylic. I did an underpainting and I like sealed it, and then I did the overpainting in oil with a little bit of leaf, and it came out nice, and it sold, and it's a nice little piece. And then what I did later was I corrected it slightly and had it as a print. So it took out like the seam for the book, and the corners were rounded because it was a Moleskine. So I kind of like tweaked it slightly, and then made it just like a nice rectangle, and then I have it as a print. I don't have any right now, but I was selling those for a while.
That's
Uh,
amazing. I'm gonna change to another one, but I wanted to ask you,
really
you're so good at choosing the colors. Do you have like a heuristic, like a way of thinking about the
oh,
palette?
I'm thinking in terms of color harmonies that are like musical or analogous is really good. Like the color formal color harmonies. There's a lot of play and a lot of range. Like that's another thing that gets like totally screwed up. Like the sort of triadic, the complementary. Like complementary is contrasting So it induces a certain amount of tension into the work, right? But if you have tension with figure ground, you're already inducing a certain tension, right? Or a tension of light and dark. But if you're then adding more tension by having a chromatic tension, then that is different than having chromatic harmony and other forms of tension. So I prefer, like in terms of colors, I prefer colors that are not necessarily clashing with each other. I tend to go more towards analogous or split complementary or something like that, where they're a little bit more getting along, I guess is another way of saying it. Like they kind of work well together. I'd
Yeah.
rather have tension in other areas.
I wouldn't like to admit that, but I'm going to say it. I never really studied any color theory or composition rules. I just look at nature and think this goes well. I like the earthy tones. I looked at natural associations of color, and that's pretty much it. And I think a lot of it is like a educated taste, I think, in
Right.
this.
So the thing is, like when you respond to natural color, or if you're looking at master paintings and you're saying like, wow, I really love this color in this painting. When you take those things out, if you use like a color picker or something, if you take those things out, it usually tends to be the case that those things that you respond to fall within certain systems. They fall within that gamut. It's just that you haven't abstracted the system yet, right? So some people are drawn towards the complementary colors. Some people are preferring the variations of the triadic. Some people are more gravitating towards one or the other of these like sort of basic ways of color design. So I think that would be a good part of training would be to do things like obviously collect images and say, well, I don't really care about the subject matter, or I don't care whether it's graphic or whether it's realist, but I'd like the color in these paintings. And you can have like a folder, whether printed out or digital, you can have a folder that says, look, all of these color designs, I respond to this type of color, and of course the actual hues that you're using are going to correspond to certain kind of moods or vibes or feelings, right? If you tend to be a certain type of person, you're going to gravitate towards warmer colors as opposed to cooler, right? That's just an inevitable thing.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, certain people prefer certain colors that, for me, give me. Yeah, some people prefer colors that would normally give me anxiety, for instance, or make me feel really uncomfortable.
Which colors?
Well, if I have certain associations like purple with black, it's not necessarily bad association, but that makes me feel really uncomfortable. Pink, I like pink. I mean, I wear pink. It's like a purple pink, but it's really difficult to use in painting. And when I put it next to black in a painting, it's something that I mean, it's also very rare that you get to use these associations of colors.
That's where you have to take it into the imaginary and sort of
Yeah,
the graphic and things like that, where you can use things like, what works well with pink is like gray. And you see that in a lot of like
that's soft.
80,
It's very
80,
soft,
yeah, like pastel colors and things like that.
and that's true. So, can you see this? This is mixed media, right?
That one is pencil and ink.
Ink.
So, yeah, it's pencil and ink. And yeah, it's just graphite pencil and black, a little bit of black ink for the hair, and then red ink for the mantilla. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like a Hispanic themed, like
Yeah,
in
so
terms of the headwear.
veil, Spanish headdress.
Yeah, Spanish headdress.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is the same model.
Yeah.
I really like the fact that I haven't had that much practice in painting portraits while using greens in the face, and I've seen a lot of, especially Asian, Korean watercolor artists, like realist painters that use greens in really incredible ways. Like I can see them using greens and blues in areas where I would not normally put them. And
Right. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, no, you can talk, because that's one.
So, for example, so one of the things that you would learn, like in traditional oil painting, like in the Titian school, Venetian school later, it's like some of the hues that are produced in as a result of like uh, like 1600s, let's say, there's a lot of glazing and layering and all this kind of stuff, right? That's a sort of traditional approach. What would happen is that we're talking in a time with like limited pigment choices as opposed to 20th century. But one of the things they observed is that when you pass white over the reddish brownish grounds, right? They would all use like, like the bowl underpaintings, right? Or burnt umber, burnt sienna, like this kind of thing. Is that when you pass wet over dry, or when you pass white oil over red, you produce a purplish, silvery purplish hue. And it's an optical mix. It's not there's no purple there. You're not adding purple to anything. It's simply because of the white going over the red. And so sometimes you see this development in oil painting where you'd see something and you go, wow, that looks like a green, like the Verdaccio, in the Italian painting, where it's like an intentional greening of the underpainting, right?
Interesting.
Like corpse painting. And then you put the colored contrasting, the way they're trying to imitate like how leaves are colored or whatever, right? How things in nature are colored. But what you see is, like I said about that thing about the development over 500 years, is that once you start introducing more options and punching things up, because you are abstracting things, because things become more graphical, you'll see this in this, like what I was saying about the sweet spot of like World War I. I see it a little bit in Serov, but I see it more in Mucha, where he deliberately puts in greens, blues, purples, especially when you're talking about light complected people. I mean, you see it in Bouguereau. Like there's like this blue underpainting, like the veins or the shadows, right? So the lighter complected people tend to have that blue undertone, right? Bluish or purplish undertone. Blue violet, you'll see a lot. And then more Mediterranean people that are a little more creamy or a little more olive skin,
Olivia.
the undertones tend to be towards greenish. So there's, what I'm saying, like, so when you're painting and you're aware of these different things, you can punch it up. Like you can just straight up add, the blues, the purples, whatever you want to the flesh mixes to get these like wonderful, cool and warm, playing with the flesh tones. I mean, flesh tones are kind of like mostly grays, honestly. Like most of the time they tend to be towards the gray. It's like when you buy that flesh tone paint and it's like out of the tube, it looks like it's too pink or it's too peach. It's like too saturated, and you have to like knock it down to actually make it
And it's
useful.
really fascinating, because if you were to sample, for instance, your skin color and put it on a white napkin, or draw it on a paper, you don't see it. And that's very important, to educate your eye to see things that you don't naturally see. As with
Like if you have
shadows.
like a dead skin, right? Like if you had like a big thick layer of dead skin and you peeled it off and you put it against a stark white napkin or something, or a white canvas, it's going to look kind of grayish. It's going to be kind of grayish, maybe purplish, silvery kind of. And so that's what you should be doing when you're trying to make flesh tones. You should be mixing up grays. And then that's what I do in my, like, if I'm actually working alla prima, I will mix up these grays and then I slightly saturate, like I'm carefully dialing it up and I'm putting it in different directions. So I have cools and I have warms, but it's essentially grays. But I don't think that you need to necessarily start with neutral gray, like you could buy neutral gray in a tube. You don't necessarily need to do that, but you can mix up your own grays. You can add, your white, whatever white you're using to burnt sienna, for example, or raw sienna, and you could play with that. But we're talking like very tiny amounts, very small amounts, and you can add black, whatever. You can add all different things. I never use ivory black. I can't stand it. And I see all these people recommending all these things. There's a lot. This is another thing about the teaching part, is there's really a lot of bad chemistry that gets involved in people sort of unquestioningly passing down like color palettes, and they don't know that like certain pigments don't work well with other pigments. So you're promoting degradation, cracking, and things like that. You're promoting bad things by not knowing which colors go with other colors. And that's apart from like using lead or whatever, or poisonous stuff.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about it. Maybe we could do another stream just about that because it's a very fascinating topic and I have to jump out in maybe 5 minutes. But
Go ahead.
it was really fascinating because, I mean, simplistically speaking, I obviously do notice, like if I look at my own hand, I see my veins I'm more warm toned, so I can see my veins are more greenish and a little bit olive. And some people, you can see them more bluish, and you can see the face, the tones. But just thinking about it in terms of grays, it's very helpful.
Use that like the colors that you see, right? So if you see the undertone and you say, well, it's slightly bluish green, like a phthalo or something like that, then you should have that to mix down while you want to do your portrait or whatever. Like you would want to take that saturated color and then mix it down. So you're abstracting it from analyzing it, from looking at the surface and say, well, let me start with that and let me mix it down. So you're adding white, or you're adding gray or white, because adding white to it is automatically you're gonna go to gray, like you're already there, because the white oil paint is never going to be that bright compared to the bright white of the paper or whatever, bright white of the panel or whatever you're doing.
I realize how much I've distanced myself because I tried maybe twice oil painting, but because I don't practice it, I wanted to start oil painting this year. I have like a box of oil paints, but it's so different in watercolor.
Yeah. Do you ever use gouache?
I started using gouache this year. I used to use tempera in the past.
Yeah, because that's a good segue to using oils, would be to use
I
gouache.
noticed that it's so easy to overmix gouache and to make grays, to muddy the colors.
Yeah.
So the first time I used that, I became aware of it, and I was thinking, in watercolors, if you don't want them, if you're at the beginner level, I would suggest that you don't mix more than 2-3 colors at once, because if you try too much, you just end up in grays, and when you use grays in watercolors, it just doesn't have any light anymore. It just becomes really flat and bland, as a composition. And also, what's very what I love about this one, I mean, all of them, all of your paintings and drawings, there's a lot of reflected light on the body, which is something really important as well to mention. There's reflected light from the environment. So you use, somebody I think said, it's not always necessarily the case. It's not really, don't have to be dogmatic, but shadows, they kind of capture all the colors from the environment. And if it's not a super dark shadow, then you should see a little bit of the colors around. And that's an art in itself.
There's mixed color in there. I mean, if you actually, that painting up close, I have a lot of like actual just marks, like just like dash, dash, dash. So I'm treating it like a drawing, even though I'm using a brush, right? So that one's a little larger. That's like 36 inches across. That one's 24 by, yeah, that one's 24 by 36. So, but if you look at like the larger masses, like the larger shapes of what look like from, you're standing back and you think, well, it's smoothed out. The body is smooth, like the back or whatever. But actually, when you get up and you look at it from a foot away, it actually has a lot of hatch marks. There's a lot of movement in there still, even though there is some smoothing out. There's some blocking in of values and things like that. I'm also remembering that when I'm adding color to the shadows, to the shadow side, or to the halftones, actually, is that I'm taking pure mixed color from the palette, but I'm popping in dash marks. So I don't have to, my mark making is what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be the same evenly throughout the whole thing, is what I'm saying. So I'm using like larger brushes for these masses, but while it's still wet, I can pop in, if I need to show color in the reflected light, I make sure that as I'm mixing, it's of the same value, but it's higher chroma. So I'm looking across like that, like across the scale. I'm saying, here's a desaturated gray, and here is a saturated cool or warm, and then I put that saturated color right up against or over the gray, because I've already established values, right? I'm always treating these things like drawings. So I've already established values. Now I can play with the color however I want, as long as the value is the same. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely, absolutely does. I feel like I've learned so much right now. And also, I wanted to conclude with a big idea, big thought, actually, and it's a huge principle that drawing is the foundation of art, and painting is basically drawing with different techniques and understanding of color, not vice versa. I think there was, at some point, I've seen a comment, somebody asking whether drawing is like painting, but
No,
it's just drawing is
it's
the. Sorry?
just drawing, but also, right, the caveat or whatever included in that is that drawing, so much of drawing is design, and that's the linchpin for all of these different things. And diseño, it's like
Exactly.
deliberate placement of things and refining things over time. So like for example, this one here, it's not just the ornament, but literally the figure itself is carefully designed. You don't always have to slavishly copy your references. We're not going back to the thing about eloquence. Like, I'm not interested in copying pictures or trying to be photorealist or anything like that. I don't care about that stuff. It's not interesting. So a certain amount of sort of having reference, obviously, from live model, whatever. With these, I actually have the model pose for me, and then work out some studies, right? Some drawing studies, and or because people get tired, you can't hold a pose for weeks and weeks and weeks, however long you're doing it. What you can do is do as much work as you can initially with drawings. I'm saying with like drawing studies from life. Then when the model gets starting to get tired and you go, man, I want to save this. This is such a good pose or whatever. Then you go and you take a photo yourself of the model that you have in front of you. You take that photo and then you use that as your reference point. You can always put the model back in the same pose and sort of, work back and forth between going back to life drawing but if you have the photo, you can use that as a memory aid, right? To what
That's
you
a
were doing.
great advice.
Yeah. To what you were doing before. I find that doing memory work is actually better. Like, in other words, work as much as you can. Model gets tired. You're doing the same pose for 3-4 hours or whatever. You're doing a drawing study. Then you take the photo exactly in the same position, like you're going to, like it's representing your sort of the eye shot. Then you print out that photo, and now you have an actual reference that you can use to complete that painting. I mean, and then, but what I'm saying is that the model goes away. You have this reference. You can enhance the drawing that you already did from life by looking at that reference photo. But your memory of the session will actually, be a big part of that. Like, you can actually remember things differently. I know it's hard to explain, but it's something you got to do when.
A lot of things you fully understand once you start to practice them. You can use your intuition a little bit and filling in the gaps yourself.
Yeah.
As you said, it's a lot of understanding, discernment, and just kind of. I don't remember like what we use, because we used a lot of words. It's very difficult to describe. Kind of feel the model,
Yeah.
feel the pose, feel the gesture
Yeah.
yourself.
Yep.
Because when you really focus, you actually notice that even your face kind of imitates the face of the model. To a
You
certain
feel it as
degree.
a sensation. You feel it as a sensation, like the apprehension. I always talk about that, like the
Apprehension. That's
apprehension of the form. It's the same thing that we feel when we're looking at athletics, like when we're looking at the Olympics or something, and we see something that looks like a wonderful movement, right? Like the catching of something, or the striking of something, or the running, or whatever. We actually, part of the excitement of that is that we, at some level, because of the fact that we're of the same species and we're of the same, make, let's say, as the athlete, we do feel that at some level in our body. There's like this mirroring that happens, and the same thing is happening with poses, with the model and your painting and stuff. Like, you're experiencing the same kind of thing at a very reduced, sort of speed, but it's really the same thing. So developing that sensitivity happens from life drawing. developing that, and then you can go and look at finished works, and you'll still feel the same thing. Like you look at sculptures, you look at paintings, and you'll still pick it up.
That's true. I hope this was really helpful for me. It was. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I got to think about things that I never thought about before, and also just the fact that you think about subjects that you think you know from a different point of view, have a different reference now, or think about it more nuanced is incredibly helpful in your artistic journey or just advancing in your artistic maturity. And thank you everyone who was here actively listening throughout the whole time. And I'm really sorry, Damian, it was my internet and I thought it was yours.
It's probably you usually pretty crappy Wi-Fi, so it could have been.
It worked. It was also my second stream, and it's the first time I shared the screen, and I hope this worked really well. Yeah. Thank you very much, Damian, for joining me tonight. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Have a great evening or second half of the day, I think.
Yeah, it's like 2:00 over here right now.
It's afternoon. It's getting really, really dark here in Copenhagen. So yeah, see you next time in the next stream.
Okay.
Thank you very much for joining.